I mean, related in many ways is spiritual health, and our theme for the year at Atonement is let peace rule your hearts, our hearts. And we're aware of how complex that simple statement is. And in October, we focused on mental health and what it looks like to talk about mental health. And this month, we're talking about spiritual health, which isn't unrelated, but it's just a slightly different aspect of the larger picture of peace within and peace without, which we're going to get to all of those pieces. But the reason that I wanted to do this with you is because I felt like before we served together, just for people who are watching, we served together at my first call in Rochester. And when I came out of seminary, I really got this clear message that spirituality was works righteousness. It was trying to prove yourself and work your way up to God. So that was stupid because we're Lutherans and we don't do that. And then we worked together and you had this exuding sense of grace and joy. And you talked about spirituality all the time and spiritual practices. And I realized that spirituality was simply working on your relationship with God. It was the quality of your relationship with God. And there was no right, wrong way to do that. And so that was pretty transformative for me. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I guess I first want to just ask you, what was your path that led you to be interested in spirituality? Yeah, well, we'll start with that.
For me, I just came to this point in life and ministry and was really not pushed into it, but I just had a sense that something was missing and I wasn't sure what it was. I was serving as a pastor and parent and spouse and friend and all these different things. And, you know, it was fine, but I don't know what it was. Something just was missing. And then my dad died early, in my opinion. He was 64. His parents had lived for a long time. And that really pushed me into, I have to find something else. I mean, I didn't know what it was I was even looking for. And then a friend suggested the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation, Baltimore. And I ended up in this program that introduced me to contemplative prayer. And part of that program was also to spiritual director. So I met with a spiritual director and then learned about prayer. And part of prayer learning was to do some teaching. And that really launched me, I think, into this journey. I feel like it changed how I live, how I see the world, how I functioned as pastor, parent, child of God in so many ways. So it was, I have to say it was my dad's death, though, that really launched me into actually doing something about whatever it was that I was missing, and was so grateful that for this friend who introduced me in that direction.
Yeah. My perception was Lutheran theology was so much about getting the right answers and intellectual stuff, which was cool, but it didn't sink below the head much. And that was one of my understandings of spirituality, is that it starts to engage more of your whole self. And yeah, I mean, what do you feel is gained as a Christian to go beyond the right answers and the wrong answers and exegesis of a biblical text into spirituality?
I have to say it was a big aha moment as well for me. You talked about your controlling things, an attempt at that my life was just about me and how I was able to live. Part of the program, and I eventually went into training to be a spiritual director, part of that was to have a daily time of listening and turning to God. And I really moved from doing that because I had to for a program into something I had to do just for my own life, and realizing that God is God, and I can do all the right things or think all the right things, but how do I listen for God and not just do all the talking? And there's so many different tools for that listening that I think have been around for years. And those tools, I'd have to say, really opened up even my own attempt at listening, which I need to work at every day. You know, I don't think anyone arrives, but it's just important to pause. And like any good relationship, it's good to listen as much as speak. So to me, how do I even listen for God?
Yeah. And there's a lot of methods out there that have worked really well for people over hundreds of years, thousands of years probably, that are available. And in some ways, there's that invitation to just practice for a while different things and see which helps you to get into that listening space. I know for me, journaling is pretty helpful. So I feel as if I'm able to not only speak, but actually listen. It is, you know, it feels weird to say that, but it's sort of like when I say, okay, tell me what I need to know. You know, God is able to work through my writing to tell me things. And I can read back and go, oh, that was so thoughtful. But I know it wasn't necessarily me. It was having that moment of connection. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of spiritual practices, is they're not outside of our daily experience, you know, or they're not outside of, they're not some mystical things that we need to arrive to a certain place to even practice, but it can be writing, you know, it can be an activity, it can be walking, it can be just being in silence, it can be breathing, just so many different things that are just human.
Yeah.
And normal. Yeah, I'm with you with the journaling too, where I feel like it's, for me, a tangible way to process. And it's like there's stuff in here. We all have the presence of God within. And as Parker Palmer talks about, we all have our own inner teacher. And how do we listen to that presence? And sometimes it is just that writing, and it's like a, not a regurgitation, but it's just like a tangible way to, oh, be surprised. And then for me too, I don't know if you've experienced this, Siri, but then when I look back at what I've written in journaling, I realize how much God has worked as well, where it's like, oh, that was really an issue. And then it just went away, and I didn't even notice it until, you know, I look back.
Oh, yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that you had a spiritual director and you referred me to your spiritual director. And we worked together for, I don't know, very, very long time. And one of the things a spiritual director does is helps you to listen for the voice of God within you. So, for example, we might start with a little centering prayer, and then I just talk about whatever's really bothering me or what's nagging at me. And she helps me to listen to what's underneath that, not in necessarily a therapeutic way, although there can sometimes be overlaps, but really, where is God in this? What is God saying? And I think that's such a helpful reminder that sometimes the nudges we're getting, or the just hearing ourselves talk about certain things, having someone listen with us to go, this is a theme. This is a theme. Are you really paying attention to this? Maybe God's trying to tell you something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think our listening for God, even though we may do it alone, it's definitely a group effort. because the more we can listen together with other people, and be it a spiritual director or a spiritual companion or a soul friend or a pastor, or on our own, I can easily get distracted or just get in my own stuff, and keep swimming in that. But when I meet with my spiritual director as well, sometimes I come away so surprised at what we even talked about. I don't know if you've experienced that too, where it's like, I didn't even know that was there. But that external listener
Yeah.
can be really helpful. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So I'm wondering how you might define spiritual health and spiritual unhealth.
That's a good question. I think spiritual health has a sense of lightness about it, a sense of that God is present, God is at work. It's a letting go, maybe a sense of detachment almost, but grounded in love. I think spiritual unhealth is more, this is my life is completely up to me. And not that this is, that, oh, I'm happy when I'm in health and I'm unhappy. But one big teacher that's been helpful for me is St. Ignatius, who started the whole Jesuit order about 500 years ago. I've been really drawn to his work and his spiritual exercises. And he talks about the spirits of consolation and desolation. The spirits of consolation draw us closer to God and to each other, kind of fitting into the greatest commandment of love. And the spirits of desolation draw us away from God or trusting in God. God doesn't go anywhere, but our trust in God, or can divide us from each other and even divide us from ourselves in a way. So I think health looks a lot like living into consolation, and unhealth looks more like desolation. But even to listen for what's drawing me towards God, what's drawing me away from God. We're talking in the midst of trying to see how this election turns out. And easily, I think it's hard for us to hear consolation and desolation, but when we're together, I think we can listen more deeply. But I think consolation right now wants us to be divided and really wants us to turn on each other, those whatever forces, desolation, sorry.
Desolation,
And
yeah.
consolation wants us, I mixed it up. Consolation wants us to go, you know what, no matter how this election turns out, how do I feel about God and neighbor and myself, and I can't let those spirits of desolation separate me from God and neighbor and self, or at least a sense of separation, because we're connected no matter how we're feeling about things. But does that make sense?
Yeah. I like that a lot, because I think that our human experience is our spirit embodied, and that we are in this experience, there's like an invisible thread connecting us to each other. And I like to say almost like an umbilical cord connecting us to God, who's also in us, and that we have our true self inside. And we can get overwhelmed by the very unhealthy narrative of the world that makes us afraid and filled with shame, and starts to disconnect us out of fear from ourselves, and not to recognize these connections that we have. And it can lead us to really dark places potentially, in our behavior, in our thoughts. One of the things I have learned about spirituality, I love that you said letting go, which reminded me that I used to think that spirituality was adding more stuff onto my plate, and realized that spirituality was just the act of noticing the things that were hurting me, the thoughts, the behaviors, the beliefs, and letting them go.
Mm-hmm.
So as you said, it's like getting lighter. It's freeing yourself from these chains that are sort of
Mm-hmm.
holding you back, trying to define you and encapsulate you and other people as well. Just,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I think a lot depends on our image of God too, where it's image of self and also image of God. If we imagine God to be distant and judgy, um, it's hard to trust a God like that. But if we can hang out with God, spend time with God, and realize that God is near and inside and love, that can shift things as well, I think. So even listening for that can be helpful. There's a one, can't remember the name of the author, but talks about the life commandments that we inherit or devise as we're growing up. And they're not in and of themselves bad, but it may help us just to survive and navigate the world. And then when we grow spiritually, emotionally, all those different ways, which I think spirituality encompasses all those, but it's a great review to, well, what life commandments have I had, and not say, oh, they're terrible, but just notice them and go, well, thank you for your service. I don't need that anymore. Or,
Yeah.
yes, I want to hang on to that life commandment. And it could be anything from the life commandment of God is love and generous. Yep, I want to hang on to that one. Or it can be a life commandment that the world is good or bad, or this type of person is bad, or I'm bad.
Mm-hmm.
So even listening to those, and again, noticing, that's a good word that you used, and with kind of a light touch as well, because I think when we look at these things, especially our own life, we can become very hard on ourselves, and then we're just feeding into that negativity instead of just going, well, okay, all right, you carry that. Interesting, do
Yeah.
you hang on to that anymore? And
Yeah.
maybe not, especially those things that chain us, as you said.
Yeah, that there's such a call to grace. I didn't realize how hard on myself and others I can be until I would center in God and have had enough experiences of leaving that space of whether it's meditation or something, just feeling wrapped in unconditional love in a way that you can say a God is full of unconditional love, right? And it's da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you actually have almost a visceral feeling of that,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty profound, and you realize, man, we're hard on ourselves and we're hard on
Mm-hmm.
each other. And that even the process of transformation, um, for example, I've been doing so much reading and unearthing in the last 5 months around like Black Lives Matter and Black theology and Black history. And I'm just appalled at what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's revealed thought patterns that I didn't know I had. Um, and it doesn't help for me to beat myself up and be like, you
Mm-hmm.
horrible person, how, blah, blah, blah. In that process of reminding myself to have grace, to
Mm-hmm.
breathe, to step back, to wrap other people in grace too.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazingly hard sometimes.
Well, and how we're so interconnected. I mean, how we, like you said, how we treat others is usually how we feel about ourselves. And so if our number one job can be doing our own inner work, which isn't a selfish thing at all, because I think ultimately that benefits the world. The more we can work on our own stuff, and it can be everything from a daily turning to God and different ways of listening for God. I mean, sometimes that means therapy. I mean, that can just be all kinds of things and all the different ways of health that you're looking at atonement. But ultimately, the more we can embrace that love that God has for us, as you said, embody it and not just have it in our head, because then you're right, it doesn't go any farther from here, and that just doesn't work. The more others will. I love the idea of energy too, where we're I think what we experience in our inner life exudes out in ways that we don't know. And I think
Mm,
any of us would say, all right, if you spend 10 minutes with somebody and they're just really negative, well, then we just pick up on that. And I become, I'm feeds my negativity. But if we're connected with somebody who is positive or loving or something, boy, that just feeds us. So back to that, working on our own stuff and embracing love can benefit everybody.
yeah, I remember hearing a long time ago about like wavelengths that
Mm.
and frequencies. Someone said that love is the highest frequency, and that they can actually hook people up to see their brain waves, and when they're full of anger and frustration, it's just a very chaotic sort of low frequency. And
Mm-hmm.
that when they start to meditate and to get into places, they even out and they start to sort of go higher, so to speak, to a higher frequency. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was such a profound way of looking at spirituality, that you're connecting with, you're tuning into a frequency that
Mm-hmm.
is lighter, healthier, calms your own
Mm-hmm.
spirit down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's really good for you in body and soul.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it does make me a little bit more aware when I'm with people whose frequencies are very chaotic. And I realize that I kind of have to protect myself to some degree, not get too sucked
Mm-hmm.
in. Um, yeah.
But even that awareness can be a great thing,
Mm-hmm.
aware of that, oh, something's off here.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more inner work or inner frequency stuff, then you even start to notice that more often, which there's a lot of work right now too, on biospirituality and
Okay.
that whole kind of science and kind of science spirit comes together with how do our bodies teach us
Mm-hmm.
in so many different ways? How do they move us from our head, and how do we listen to our body, and how does our body house tension or bad memories or different things like that? And there's just ways to listen for that I don't know if it's frequencies or what, but oftentimes notice where we house those things in our body and try not to shove them down even farther,
Yeah.
but to just feel it. We're, I think, so trained in our society to anesthetize and not feel pain
Mm.
and to have these perfect lives that doesn't exist. But how do we let our bodies lead us into listening and to feeling, and part of that whole transformation piece. Yeah, I think you
Yeah.
and I inherited such a, for what it was, a heady way of living with God, and that's kind of run its course.
Yeah.
I think that many people are finding that it's about so much more.
Mhm.
It's a whole body experience. It's a whole body of Christ experience. It's a global experience that is kind of exciting, I think.
Yeah. And I love these connections that people are forming and that I'm discovering within myself. Was um, just I remember going to a retreat and working with someone, and she said, where does like, what makes you feel the most alive and
Mm.
the most light? And I talked about music and things like that. And she says, where does your creativity and your music live in your body? What are you talking about? And then later in that retreat, we were doing some movement, and all of a sudden it was plain as day that it came from my hips. I
Mm.
realized that that was a huge funnel of my creativity. I mean, what a strange thing to realize. And it made all the sense once I made the connection, and I thought, I need to allow myself physically to move.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such spirituality, the connection that I feel between my body and soul when I do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
um, just realizing how connected we are in soul and body was a continual discovery for me. It's very fun, and I've recently started to honor this sort of latent desire to dance.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
nothing fancy, but just realizing that really does something for me inside. And yeah, it's just ongoing discoveries of things we don't always know about ourselves. And
It probably opens up, opens up something for you, and I think, and I know you do yoga and all those body things, and it can even be breathing, can just be channels for opening so much. And in a way, it's kind of east meets west, north meets south. I mean, it just so much is coming together right now. As people are lessening their fears of the other or other ways. I think if everybody has something to offer, oh my gosh, what a gift for the globe. If we can be open to each other.
Yeah. There's just such beautiful perspectives and images and practices that I've learned about when I've encountered other traditions that have completely expanded my idea of God and how to connect to God. I never would have thought of that in a million years. And someone else did. And so that's a gift for me, just as I might gift somebody else from my tradition. Yeah.
Which kind of brings us back to that first question, I think, where I think spirituality, spiritual health looks a lot like letting go, but also it's not up to me. The future of the world is not up to me. This election is not up to me. It's up to me to do what I can, but God's got this, and just that continual letting go that God's at work in some mysterious way that is deeper, I think, than we can even imagine, especially when times are more difficult. And Richard Rohr talks about that as like woming times, where when things seem so mysterious and kind of painful sometimes and dark, it's like, oh God, where are you? What's going on? My propensity can be, well, where's God? Finally God's decided I've had it, I'm out of here. But instead, I love that image where these are woming times that something is going to emerge that is even beyond our comprehension, that will benefit the globe, benefit everybody, all of God's creation.
Yeah, and if the suffering is a catalyst for so many more of us to wake up to the deeper connections, the deeper sense of resistance against the destructive narrative that pervades everything, and to say, I didn't realize how deeply enmeshed I was in that. I need to move towards the life and the love that is God and the courage. Yeah, it's not ideal, but sometimes that either whether it's your suffering or the empathetic suffering of another can snap you into, what are we doing here? What have we been doing, and how do we want to progress? How do I want to progress as a human being, and can I possibly, hopefully, affect others in a positive way? Midwife their own process too. Yeah,
like systemic racism, this summer, how many of us grew in that awareness or were snapped into that awareness of, oh my gosh, I'm a racist.
Yep.
I've participated in this systemic racism passively, maybe aggressively, I don't know, but totally unaware.
Yep.
And as you said, first reaction can be, oh, I'm so dumb. How did I not know? And the other one was, well, okay, I know now.
Yep.
I know now. And I can't go back. I won't go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kathie.
Yeah,
I've
thank
missed
you.
talking with you.
You too. Good to see you. We'll have to socially distance a coffee sometime.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, blessings to your family
Yeah.
and to all the good things you guys are doing at St. Stephen's too.
Yeah.
Um,
Blessing to you and this good work that you're doing with atonement and you guys are doing together. That's great.
yeah,
It's,
yeah.
we're all in it together.
We are, whether we know it or not.
I know. Well, good to
Both
see you.
are. Good to
Yeah.
see you. Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye bye.